Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the car company tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1991. And the model we're going to focus on in this video is the Asteroid, which is the pickup truck and our car company's lineup. This is actually a model I put off for quite a while, and the main reason for that is the 4x4. When it was released into the game, I wasn't so sure if it had been fully implemented or not. And there's a couple of reasons for that I'll go over as I go over the model itself. But let's go ahead and start off with the base trim for the Asteroid and look at what we have. Now, there's a lot of trims for this model. And as a result, I'm probably only going to cover in detail some of them. I'm probably going to gloss over most of them. I think mostly I'm going to focus on the manual transmission versions and show the differences between the automatic transmissions versions, but not go over the detailed stats as much. But in any case, let's go ahead and start from the beginning with the body and chassis choice. Now, I chose the only at least the base game, the only pickup truck that is available to us in the 1991 year period, which is this body here. And as far as the chassis goes, I went with a ladder chassis, corrosion-resistant steel, front longitudinal, McPherson strut in the front, and solid axle leaf rear. We have corrosion-resistant steel for the panel material. Now, as far as the styling goes, I went with a pretty simple styling. This hasn't really changed all that much since implementation. I think it was in 1981 was when the Asteroid was first implemented. So not a whole lot in the styling has really changed since then. And we went with longitudinal rear-wheel drive as our setup. Go ahead and look at the engines. There's going to be two different engines in this model. And the first one is a 3-liter V6. And let's go ahead and look at its performance. So it's going to produce 146 horsepower at 5,400 RPM and 103 foot-pounds of torque at 2,700 RPM. That being said, let's go ahead and look at the trim itself, starting with the gearbox. Now, the gearbox, I have a 5-speed manual, and I set this up so the 5th gear would be an economy gear or a cruising gear. This gives us a fuel economy of 14.5 miles per gallon, which is pretty decent for a pickup truck. And 0 to 62 comes out at 10.9 seconds. Now, I do have a bit of wheel spin. I've kind of gone away from in this year period especially, trying to get rid of wheel spin entirely, as the wheel spin penalty doesn't seem to be as severe as it used to be in the past. And I also, for the differential, I gave it a manual locker. This will be the case on every trim if I set this up correctly, and this is going to give us a benefit as far as the off-road ability. Their only real penalty is an increased cost and production unit. As far as the tire setup goes, I went with rims. We went a larger wheel diameter than norm, and I went with 225s in front and rear. And we have a medium compound road and steel rim material. Okay, for the brakes, solid disc 2-piston in the front and drums in here. And I went with about as big as brakes as I can get with 6 rims. And we still have a bit of brake fade, and you'll continue to see that. As a matter of fact, this is probably going to be one of the better performers as far as brake fade goes. Now, as far as the aerodynamics, I went with a off-road skid tray, again, trying to maximize the off-road ability. Now, some of these trims I could have done without, as sometimes with pickup trucks, like an off-road skid tray would be actually an optional upgrade. I just decided to select that with all of the trims just to make things simple. And the cooling airflow, I went with about 10, a little bit more than 10 above what we're required to have. And as far as the interior goes, and you're going to see this pretty much the same across the board, we have 3 seats, standard interior, standard cassette, and power steering with standard safety. Now, the suspension is progressive with gas monotube and passive sway bars. Now, as far as the suspension setup goes, I think I mostly went with the normal preset and worked with it from there. But actually, it's been a while since I set up this model. As I said, I put it off for a while. So I actually don't really remember, but this is the setup that I went with. I have a little bit stiffer dampers in the front than in the rear, as well as the springs being a little bit stiffer in the front than the rear. And the ride height is there to get rid of the bottom out. Now, I could have gone higher with the ride height, and that would improve off-road ability and such, but I didn't want to go to that extreme necessarily. Just as I could have chose off-road chunky tires for some of the trims, I didn't. I consider that to be something that somebody could do as a aftermarket modification to the vehicle if they wanted to go that route and be a little bit more middle of the road for the way we set things up. Now, as far as the detailed stats go, and as per normal, I'm just going to give you a few seconds to look at each tab, and then if you want to look at them in detail, go ahead and pause the screen. So we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally, safety. All right, let's go ahead and look at the test track. So this thing gets up to 95.4 miles an hour, so not really all that fast top speed-wise. 0 to 62 is 10.9 seconds, which is a little bit on the sluggish side, obviously. Now this is our less powerful engine. We will have a V8 in this thing as well. Cornering trees aren't terrible, but they're not spectacular either. I would say they're decent for what we're going for. Let's go ahead and see our track time. It's probably not going to be that great, but... Alright, so because we have a lot of trims to go through, I'm going to try and keep the track time short. But we have 1 minute 48.73, which goes below my 1 minute 50 mark that I like to see. So not too bad, honestly. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into the next trim here. And as I said, I'm going to gloss over some of the trims and not go over them in great detail. But we have the automatic version of that trim, if I can find it through all these trims. So A. And mostly I'm just going to show you how the gearbox is set up, because that is going to be the main difference. So here I have a 4-speed automatic. Now this fourth gear isn't set up nearly as much of an economy gear. It only partly goes beyond the top speed that we have for ourselves. And that is to try and get that 0 to 60 time to be a little bit better, but not suffering wheel spin as well. I mean, you can see the wheel spin is worse, but we also have a much slower time. This is oftentimes the sacrifice you get when you jump into automatic. I tried to balance these things, but this thing's pretty slow as a result of the difference between the two transmissions. So otherwise, though, everything is more or less the same. And I'm probably just going to show the track time real quick, which is for sure going to be pretty slow. We see the top speed is dipped off, and that 0 to 62 time is a lot slower. And this is going to be one of the big killers of any track time. So I can imagine this is going to be above that 1 minute 50 time. And it is indeed 1 minute 51.09. Maybe that transmission needs a little bit of work, but that's the way I set it up. Maybe tweaking is better, but in any case, let's move along to go to our last standard trim. So standard trims being the rear-wheel drive version. And this is with a manual transmission, and there should be an automatic transmission as well that I'm going to gloss over, as I said, and just mostly show you the differences. So let's go and look at the engine, as this is a V8. You see the power it produces. It produces 233 horsepower, 276 foot-pounds of torque, so quite a performance increase. So let's look at the transmissions. So again, we have a fifth gear being mostly an economy cruising gear. Now 0 to 62 time comes in at 7.9 seconds, and we get 13.4 miles per gallon, so this is where we're starting to get a little bit worse in the, but still not terrible for a pickup truck. in the teens is kind of the norm, especially in this. Okay, so let's move on to the rest of the setup here. So nothing's really going to change in the tire setup. Brakes, I feel like I need to go over because there's more weight that we're contending with, but the brake situation is more or less the same. So we have a lot more brake fade as a result. Cooling airflow obviously is going to be different as that was, we have a more powerful engine requiring more cooling. The interior is going to be exactly the same as I stated. There's going to be a difference with the suspension, but it is more or less going to be set up roughly the same as the other suspensions. That all said, let's go ahead and look at our detailed stats. So we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. Look at our test track. So we're looking at an increase in the top speed, 110.7 miles an hour. So we're above that 100 mark. We also definitely have a faster 0 to 60 time. Now the coordinating tree does suffer from that increased weight and probably a worse weight distribution, more front heavy. So let's go ahead and see what our track time results as. I would imagine it's going to be faster just because that 0 to 62 time being quicker. Usually that's a big determining factor, but let's go ahead and check it out. All right, so let's see what we got. So we got 1 minute 41.77, so big improvement there. We're almost under a minute 40. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our automatic transmission. If I can find it in this mess, there it is. And again, I'm mostly just going to show you the differences here. So the main big difference is going to be the transmission. So again, we have a 4-speed automatic, but this is set up, a little bit beyond the top speed, but not nearly as far as our 5-speed would be. We're going to have a little bit worse miles per gallon fuel economy. And a 0 to 62 time, at least in this instance, I was able to keep a little bit closer. It's 8.6 seconds, and it's not as big of a huge gulf of a difference as what we saw with our V6 engined versions. And I actually was able to get, I think, less wheel spin as a result of this. But trying to make it more aggressive, I couldn't get that 0 to 62 time down without suffering worse wheel spin by a decent margin. So I figured go with a little bit less wheel spin and keep kind of close. That's more or less the way I set up the transmission there. Let's go ahead and look at the detail. Well, no, I'm going to gloss over the detailed stats and just look straight to the test track time. So we lost out on some top speed and our 0 to 60 time. So again, we're going to imagine this is going to be slower. And indeed it is. We added almost 2 seconds on, so 1 minute 43.67. All right, so now it's on to our 4x4 trims. More or less what I did is I did just 4x4 versions of the rear-wheel drive trims. So the main difference is going to be that 4x4 addition. So let's jump into the base trim first. So I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I wasn't so sure whether or not this had been finished. So the first thing that I wasn't sure about was the fact that the power distribution thing here is now unlocked because I have 4x4, but you'll see and note as I move this, more or less, yes, stats change, but this number doesn't change. And this really confused me because I felt like, well, is this implemented or not? And as we can see, maybe some stats improve very slightly, but we get worse wheel spin and things like that. I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell if this has been implemented correctly or not. And this is one of those things. I really ended up going with 0 and 100 for everything because it's kind of hard for me to mark what levels things are at and replicate those levels between the different trims if I can't even see what the numbers are. So I don't know if this is a bug that just has never been addressed, that this number should be changing and it just isn't, or what. But I kept it at 0 at 100. Maybe that's not what I should be doing, but as I said, you can see no change here. And at times, actually, as a matter of fact, it's not changing the stats at all. That was just kind of a weird thing. Sometimes when you are messing with the trim, just changing something causes it to recalculate stuff. So really, as we can see here, whether it's at all the way up here or all the way down here, the stats change not at all. So I was confused with that, and the fact that this is unlocked but does absolutely nothing, I was unsure of. Another thing that I noted that kind of surprised me is the wheel spin is actually worse with all of my 4x4 trims than the rear wheel drive versions. And this actually puzzled me. Now, I can maybe assume that the main reason this is happening is we're adding a lot of weight on. And this weight is mostly going to be in the front of the vehicle, so it's making it more front heavy. So my assumption here is because it's so much more front heavy, you have less weight on the rear wheels, and that's why the wheel spin is worse. But I am just kind of confused because my understanding of how this game's supposed to work is not really what I'm seeing with the stats when I choose 4x4. I see a decrease in most of my stats, I'm going to assume due to the weight, and the only real improvement I get is through utility and off-road ability. You would think that the other stats here would maybe improve in some ways by choosing 4x4. That doesn't happen. Usually you're going to see, other than in, not always, but sometimes. And this really confused me, as I was told by one of the devs that a big element of drivability is handling poor road conditions caused by inclement weather or what have you, and you would think 4x4 would give you an advantage in that regard, but it doesn't, which, as I said, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But it is what it is, and I made the 4x4 trims. If 4x4 hasn't been implemented fully, and a lot of these things are going to change, they change, but this is the way things are, and let's move on. So what I have here is the gearbox is set up mostly the same, 0 to 60 time. I don't think it's changed really at all, even though we have added a lot of weight on here. It doesn't look like it's changed very much at all from what I remember. If it has, it's been very minimal. But we are going to see some differences, and I want to jump to one of the big differences. That's the way I set up the suspension. I stiffened up the dampers a little bit, and I made the ride height taller for all the 4x4 trims. Just so you're aware of that, that's one of the changes I made. Let's go ahead, though, and look at the detailed stats here. So we have drivability, buoyaness, comfort, prestige, and finally safety. Let's look at our test track. So our top speed is roughly more or less the same, but the weight distribution should be more front heavy, and we're going to be seeing more weight, at least it should be. I might do a direct comparison back to back with the manual transmission version, because it was a little while since I've covered that. And we have a 0 to 62 time of 10.9 seconds. Cornering G's look like a little bit worse, but not significantly. So let's go ahead and see our time. I'm going to imagine this is going to be slower, and it's probably very incremental. So let's just go ahead and hop right back into our 3.0 manual, the standard version. Just see some of the differences. All right, so test track. Okay. So I'm not noticing any difference between the top speed or the acceleration. I am seeing a little bit of a difference between, as I discussed, weight distribution. Although the actual weight itself doesn't seem different, which puzzles me a little bit, because would be, because it actually says in the description of, if we go to model, we go here, it does tell you the differences. So it should be high weight, but from what I saw, the weight is exactly the same. That actually is what I expected to see. So we're going to 4x4 manual and test track. Yeah, the weight's exactly the same. So this is why I'm thinking that 4x4 hasn't been implemented correctly. because you see a big swing in weight distribution, but you don't see an improvement in weight. And maybe this is why we're not seeing the improvement with the wheel spin, because the weight isn't being added on. So this is why I have been putting this off, because I was hoping there would be some kind of patch fixing all of these apparent bugs with the 4x4 implementation. But as I said, it is what it is, and I'm not going to be holding this stuff off any longer. I'm going to do the models that I want to do and get them out of the way, because I think I've waited well enough. I've waited long enough in any case. All right, so that being said, it looks like there's definitely some things not being implemented correctly with 4x4, but let's move on to our other trims. So I'm going to skip over the 4x4 automatic. It is mostly going to be exactly the same as automatic trims with the standard version, just with that 4x4. The only difference. So let's just jump straight to the 5-liter V8, not the same 4x4. Oh. All right, and let's go ahead and look over the detailed stats that we have here. So we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and safety. Go to our test track. So again, you're going to have more front heavy, even though probably the weight is exactly the same. Our acceleration is a little bit slower from what I remember, 8.1. I believe it was at, what was it at? The going in between all these trims, I'm starting to forget. So let's go to the standard one for our acceleration. I honestly don't remember. So we want track. Yeah, it was 7.9. That's what I. So we're seeing a difference here, but we didn't see that difference. 6 version. But yes, I am noticing that the weight is exactly the same. No difference in weight distribution. Which, how can you have a difference in weight distribution without actually changing the weight? That isn't correct. In any case, moving along, we have a slower 0 to 62 time, and the cornering G's looks worse as well. Let's go ahead and do our track time. And we have 1 minute 42.07, so lower than. Okay, with all that being said, let's go ahead and look at some of our market data. Keep things going a little bit quicker. I'm going to only go over certain and differences here, and then we'll go on to the ones we really care about. So first, I'm going to go with the standard 3.0. And then I'm going to show the automatic just so we can see the difference in how the market share is going. So mostly what we're looking at here is delivery, heavy delivery, and heavy utility. This is actually what we want. And some of the other categories we do decently in are utility and utility premium, as well as light delivery. All of these categories are good. This is exactly what we're looking for. And then we also do well in the off-road category. Well, which again is what we're looking for. So we're hitting all the categories we want to be hitting. It's just a matter of the fact that we're not all that affordable, which honestly doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because you would think that vehicles, and I think this affordability stuff probably needs some adjustment, because you would expect a pickup truck to be one of the more expensive vehicles in any car company's lineup, and the fact that very few people in that market afford it, something that is honestly pretty cheaply built, doesn't seem like it makes a whole lot of sense to me. But that's the way things are. So in the utility category, only 35% of the market can afford it, so we're taking a pretty big hit there. So okay, let's go ahead and look at our automatic trim just to see how that changes. Probably going to be the only automatic trim I look at, because you're going to expect the same kind of dynamic with all of the other trims. So here we're starting to get into utility sport budget for some reason, but we're noticing improved stats and well. probably the increase in drivability being a factor here. The drivability being pretty heavily, as a matter of fact, the most heavily of all of these stats. But affordability has also gone down as well because auto is a bit more expensive. All right, so let's look at our V8 and go into the 4x4 version. And here we're seeing, again, most of the same categories, except we've slipped into a little bit more of the utility than delivery, one of our big but the one we've done the best in is the heavy delivery. But again, we're doing poorly in the affordability, and which I think is really heavily affecting our stats, as we saw before. I'm not so sure if off-road is better than it was with the. But now let's go ahead and jump into glitches. Let's go ahead and jump into 4x4 annual. And the thing that I expect to see here is, yes, more of an improved off-road category. We're still doing decently in all of these categories down here, utility, delivery category, but now we're pretty much better in the off-road category, mostly off-road category best. But we've also improved in the heavy delivery category quite a bit as well. All right, let's go ahead and look at the V8 powered 4x4 8. And then in this instance, we're mostly focused on the off-road category. Off-road premium and off-road. We really dropped off in the heavy delivery category. But I'm not so sure. Maybe we improved a little bit in utility. But we've definitely seen a hit in these categories, but an improvement in the off-road category. And just to do it, I'm going to also load up the V8 automatic for it. See how much of a difference we have. So this is going to be our most expensive trim, more than likely. And here we see utility premium is doing well. We have utility sport budget also doing well, and then off-road premium is our other one. And off-road is also increasing well. And it looks like we have a stat across the board, most focusing on, but also a drop in affordability. Okay, so that's all of the market shares that I'm going to look at. So let's go ahead and look at just a comparison between different models. And this is going to be one of those things I'm not going to go over in a huge amount of detail. If you want to pause your screen, you can. But drivability-wise, I'm going to expect that our automatic V6 version is our best, which it is, and then our automatic 8, second best. And it looks like our 4x4 vehicles are doing slightly better as far as drivability goes in some areas than the standard one. The only area that I see that not being the case is with the V8 4x4 versus standard. Now, sportiness is going to go in the favor of the standard trims and the manuals, and comfort is yeah, I was interested to see what the dynamic here. It doesn't really look like it changed comfort very much at all between the manuals and not the standards and the 4x4s. And it also doesn't look like it's affected prestige. I would assume that it would affect safety slightly, but we have to keep in mind that the weight difference is not being implemented correctly, as we can see here. So when we go between our standard 8 and our 4x4 V8, there's no weight difference at all. And I don't think this is correct. And this is one of the reasons why I just have been putting off doing the pickup truck, because I felt like with the 4x4, I wanted to implement it. It makes sense to implement it in a pickup truck, but it doesn't seem like this is finished, honestly. It doesn't seem like it's working correctly. I had plans to maybe introduce another model, which would have been SUV, but I may actually hold off and do that in the next period at 1996 rather than 1991. And the main reason being is that gives the 4x4s a little bit more time, maybe if they get fixed for the future. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.